And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and I trust you had a good afternoon break. Well, Ms. Lemko, if you would have a seat, everybody, if you'd call your next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, the state would call Richard Jones by Zoom.
All right, and then we'll have the clerk give an oath to Mr. Jones. What? I think you'd have to over there, Ellie.
Will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I will.
Will you please state your name for the record and spell both your first and last name for the court?
Richard F. Jones, RICHARD-F-JONES.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, today. Thank you for taking this opportunity to testify here today by Zoom. We just have a few questions for you. Now, currently, Mr. Jones, are you retired?
Yes, I am.
And when did you retire from your previous employment?
December 1st, 2020.
And where were you employed previous to retiring?
Georgia Pacific.
Okay. And you can hear me pretty well?
Yes.
Okay. Now, at the time that you were employed with respect to Georgia Pacific, and I guess I should ask just for the record, what is Georgia Pacific?
Georgia Pacific is specifically the Green Bay Broadway facility. Is located at 1919 South Broadway, and it's a Dink paper tissue products mill.
Okay. Now, with regard, I think you kind of alluded to it by saying in Green Bay, this 1919 South Broadway, is that located in the city of Green Bay, Brown County, Wisconsin?
Yes.
And with regard to your role at Georgia Pacific, first of all, how long did you work there?
Almost 31 years.
In the course of your duties working at Georgia Pacific, what was your position there?
I held several positions, but my most recent position was a senior environmental engineer.
Okay, previous to being a senior environmental engineer, what other positions did you hold there?
I would have been involved in corporate engineering as a senior environmental engineer, and in respect to our R&D facility, I would have been a senior or environmental engineer in that perspective.
Okay, and what type of educational background and qualifications do you have insofar as being an environmental engineer?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in civil engineering with an emphasis in environmental. I am a licensed professional engineer with the state of Wisconsin, licensed solid waste manager, and licensed wastewater operator with the state of Wisconsin.
When you're referring to the fact, and strike that, with respect to these licensing, have you been licensed or certified in the 31 years that you have worked as an environmental engineer?
Yes.
With regard to the reference you just made to solid waste, what is solid waste?
That's a waste byproduct. It may consist of, well, in our situation, either ding sludge or boiler ash residuals from the operation.
Okay. And so boiler ash and sludge were two things that were byproducts that were coming out of Georgia Pacific?
Broadway facility, and for a period of time, the Day Street facility also.
Previous to working at Georgia Pacific, had you also worked in the city of Manitowoc?
Yes, I did.
And what was your position there?
I was initially the assistant superintendent and then became superintendent of the wastewater operation and plant.
After you worked in the city of Manitowoc, is that when you then came to Georgia Pacific, which was formerly Fort Howard?
Yes,
Did you also, historically, have you done some consulting as well?
yes, I did.
And what was that in reference to?
I was involved with a consulting firm, dealt primarily with the design, construction, and startup operations of wastewater facilities.
Now, I asked you about solid waste. Now you're referring to wastewater. What is that?
Wastewater is a liquid byproduct of a process.
Okay. And so the expertise that you have is in wastewater and solid waste?
As well as, yes to that, those two items, as well as beneficial reuse of residuals.
And what is that?
Solid waste byproduct, in our case, of the industrial process.
Do you also have expertise in landfill operations
Yes.
as well as sediment?
Yes.
Okay. And what is sediment?
Sediment would have been the material typically dredged from either a river or lake.
Okay. And are you also a licensed wastewater operator?
Yes.
When you're referring to the fact that you're a senior environmental engineer previous to your retirement, what is a senior environmental engineer?
It typically has, obviously, you have numerous years of experience in a field, whether it be, in my case, wastewater or landfill operations.
And at some point in the course of you working at Georgia Pacific, did your corporation also utilize the services of McKeefrey and Sons?
Yes, they did.
And what did Georgia Pacific use them for?
They used them in various functions. At one time, they did the Broadway facilities snow removal. They also had extensive years of experience in trucking our deep sludge and boiler ash residuals.
And were they contracted out then to move solid waste over to a landfill area?
Yes, they were.
And what is the name of that landfill area and where is it located?
The facility is the Green Bay West landfill, and it is located in the southwest quadrant of the city of Green Bay.
And just so the jury understands kind of location-wise, is this something located near Austin Straubel Airport?
Yes, it'd be north of the airport and also north of the Oneida Casino.
Is that kind of then across the street from the airport?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, we actually had some questions to some McKeefrey employees, and we had asked them about the vastness of that area, and they referred that you might be more familiar with how large that area is insofar as acres, or are you familiar with how big that Green Bay West landfill is?
Yes, I am.
How big is that?
The permitted waste disposal area is 293 acres. The whole parcel of property is approximately 850 acres.
Okay. Now, when you're referring to the contracting services that Georgia Pacific was doing with McKeefrey and Sons, essentially, were they responsible for loading material at Georgia Pacific and transporting it over to that landfill?
Yes, they were.
And then was it directed where it was going to be placed?
Yes.
Now, with regard to this landfill area, we also heard some information about cells. Do you know approximately how many cells are at that landfill?
There are currently 17 cells.
And do you know back in 2013 how many there would have been?
There would have been 17 cells.
Oh, still then?
Yes.
Now-
The footprint has been stable or in that configuration for quite some time.
So previously, when you were indicating your experience also had to do with layouts or operations, part of that is the design of that landfill area?
Yes, it would have been.
Now, can you just describe for the jury, when we're talking about a cell, what is that?
A cell is basically a parcel property within the whole landfill. And it is outlined by perimeter dikes. And it would have various engineering components inside the cell. And then you would have the ability to place material in that cell.
With regard to what's going in that cell, did different cells have different materials in them?
Typically, it is digging sludge. One cell did take PC sediment, and there are also 3 cells currently that are holding boiler ash that will be used in the development of final cover systems for cells when they're closed.
So there were cells that have sludge, there were cells that have ash, and there's cells that have PCBs?
Yes.
Okay. Now, with regard to, so the jury would understand this landfill area, the things that are going in there that we're talking about, it's different than solid waste, which also is defined as garbage. Is that right?
Yes, it is. It has different properties, physical and chemical.
And would that go to a different area, something like everyone's garbage that gets collected?
The Green Bay West landfill is not permitted to take municipal solid waste.
Okay. And is there something about the green?
Operations of the 3 counties, which is currently going to Allegheny County.
Oh, okay. Outagamie. So I understand. So the solid waste or garbage that people traditionally have picked up or taken away, now that is something that collectively Brown County's combined with Outagamie, and our garbage is going there. Am I saying that right?
Yes, Allegheny and Winnebago counties
Okay.
also.
Okay. So ultimately, the point of this is that the Green Bay landfill takes something different than just solid waste.
We take industrial waste, we don't take municipal solid waste.
Okay. And industrial waste, is that different than like something that is biohazardous?
Yes, depending on the process. In our case, paper mill sludge or boiler ash, that definitely is different than municipal solid waste.
And when you're talking about boiler ash, could you tell the jury what you mean by boiler ash?
In industry terms, in our situation, Boiler ash consists of ash that is generated from the burning of coal or pet coke. And then we also have a process of a facility that takes sludge and burns that. And that was also deposited at the landfill.
Besides the boiler ash, then, the other thing we had been speaking of was sludge. Can you just describe for the jury what sludge is?
In Broadway's situation, in the process, we wash out various materials out of the paper, and that is typically clay-based, and also that would be in that sludge would be short paper fibers.
Based upon the items that are put in that landfill, are there more environmental safeguards that are in place? I guess I should withdraw that. The biohazardous landfill, which would be different than this landfill, would have more environmental safeguards. Is that right?
Are you referring to hazardous waste or?
Hazardous waste. I think I'm calling it hazardous.
Yeah, hazardous waste would have more components to protect the environment.
And because of that, traditionally, is that an area that also would have more restricted access to it? Or don't you know?
For hazardous waste, that is correct, but the facility does not house hazardous waste.
Mm-hmm. So your facility would not have the same requirements that some of those may with respect to restricted access?
That would be correct.
So let's talk about that, the Brown County landfill. And now I'm talking about what it's like back in 2013. When somebody would be going into that area, it was still a fenced-in area, is that right?
Correct.
But with regard to how it was contained, was there actually a lock that somebody could get in if they had the keys to that area?
Yes.
And were there any surveillance cameras anywhere there?
There are no surveillance cameras at landfill site.
And that's continued till today?
Correct.
So back in 2013, we had one witness that thought there might have been one in the front entry, but there isn't one, is that right?
That's correct, there is not.
Okay. And based upon that, there was a presumption that the individuals that were working at the landfill were working there during day hours? Were there set hours essentially where you presumed people would be there?
The set hours for the landfill were 7 a.m. to 3 p.m.
However, were there times that sometimes on a job somebody might maybe be extending it a little bit later?
Only later in the evening. The 7 o'clock opening was the hard set.
And when,
The only,
I was just going to, you can
the
go.
only exception to that would be if snow plowing occurred, which would have been 8 to 6 a.m.
Okay. If we had a couple witnesses that talked about maybe you'd be there till 5, sometimes there would be a little bit later, but nothing into any extreme hours from what you're aware of.
That's correct.
But essentially, there was no like swipe system out there that you were able to timestamp when somebody was out there either. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I'm talking about 2013, but is that still the same system they have there now?
Yes.
Okay. At some point back in 2013, Georgia Pacific, we already talked about the fact they have contracted with McKeefrey and Sons. Back in April of 2013, was that contract with McKeefrey and Sons in place for them to be removing your sledge?
Yes,
And at some point, were you familiar with the employees at McKeefrey and Sons?
yes,
Did you have direct contact with some of those employees that were coming over to Georgia Pacific?
yes,
Were you familiar with an individual or employee by the name of James Prokopovitz?
yes,
And would you have been a supervisor to him
yes,
just because of the contractual services?
yes, because he generally was the supervisor at the mill, and he had the overall responsibility of determining what waste they would be loading and transporting to the landfill site on a daily basis.
He would make decisions on what was transported to the landfill?
Yes,
And do you know what his title was or there?
not his technical
Okay.
thing.
Okay. But that was his role as you recognized it to determine what was transported to the landfill.
Yes,
Now, at that time, were there 5 different types of waste streams?
yes.
And what were those?
There was steam sludge. There would have been coal, bottom ash, coal fly ash, what we refer to as boiler 9 ash, and then boiler number 10 ash, which is the ash which is generated from the burning of steam sludge.
And part of the decision that was being made then is which waste stream was going to be loaded on that day. Is that right?
Yes,
And who would make that decision?
Curly would.
Okay. And now you're referring to him as Curly. I guess I forgot to ask. Did he have a nickname that people knew him by?
Yes, he went by Curly.
All right. Now, at that time, isn't it true that Curly was an end loader operator?
That was his primary function, yes.
Okay. So his job was making decisions about what was going to be loaded, but he would assist in loading the various waste streams?
He was primarily the primary person loading material.
And at that time, have you used the verbiage that he had decision rights?
Yes,
And so what do you mean by that? Just kind of what you've explained? He was the one deciding?
he would make the decision of, what material they would haul at what period of time of the day.
And then that would go over to the landfill cells?
Yes,
Now, I know it's slang verbiage outside the industry, but those landfill cells, were they formerly also called sludge ponds?
yes,
But the more formal term these days is landfill cells?
yes,
Now, at the time, you've referred to the fact that out at the landfill was this padlock. You indicated there were keys to open it, is that right?
yes.
And who would have access to those keys?
The McKeefrey personnel, but typically it would be the landfill operator that would have ownership of that key.
And if Curly had told law enforcement he had access to the keys, that would make sense?
Yes,
Now, you indicated there were no cameras out at the landfill. There was no formal check-in system. There wasn't really a security system out there either at that time, was there?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, when items are placed out in these cells, is there a difference between the stability of what's in a cell full of ash or a cell full of sludge?
Yes.
What's the difference in the stability?
Ash residue is strictly solid in nature, so it's very stable. Sludge material it has a range of stabilities. It can be from somewhat solid to a semi-liquid state.
And individuals that would work out in that area, they would be familiar with the stability of those cells. Would you agree?
Yes.
And when it involves sludge in a cell, is there a rotation that can also occur?
In the sludge material?
Yep.
Yes.
What is that?
That is a condition of its stability, and in engineering terms, it's the rotation failure of material. In other words, it cannot hold its own weight, so it rotates.
Now, although there were portions then that were solid in some of these cells, and I guess I should back up, is there only one cell open of those 17 at a time, or are there multiple cells available?
There are multiple cells available.
So when somebody is going out to the site, there would be several different places that things are brought to, because there's several different cells available?
Yes, there would be, but we typically assign the utilization of only one or two cells.
Okay. If a worker thought there had been 3 available back in 2013, that may be, but there weren't all 17 available.
That would be correct.
Okay. These cells, after one of the cells is full, is it capped off?
Yes, it is.
And what does that mean?
We have a process where we install various layers once the cell is deemed full, and then put a liner on top of it, and then protect the soils over the top of that liner, and then seed it or landscape it. So it becomes at that point a closed cell. In other words, you don't have the capability to go to it.
So it's kind of like once they're full, you cap them off.
Yes.
How, approximately how long does it take on average to fill a cell? Can it take years?
Yes.
What's like the shortest you've seen?
The shortest I've seen would have been PCB segment cell, which was filled in the approximate time frame of 1999 through about 2001.
Now, strike that. With respect to the instability of the cells that you were testifying to, the stability of a sludge cell, are there portions of it that are solid?
Yes.
And are there portions that are more of an oatmeal consistency?
Yes.
Could it be described that there are portions of that could be consistent with what somebody would imagine would be like a quicksand?
Yes.
Now, the composition and the makeup of these cells back in 2013 would have been known to the McKeefrey workers that were going out to the Georgia Pacific landfill.
Yes.
Why, or strike that. Back in 2013, if law enforcement would have wanted to search these landfill cells, and it was indicated that it wouldn't be possible to dredge them, why is that?
Because of the stability of the material and the size of the cell. A typical cell will range anywhere from $250,000 to 800,000 cubic yards. So in essence, it's the sheer volume of moving that material.
And individuals that would work out at that landfill regularly going out there, they would have been familiar with the composition and the makeup of those cells.
Yes.
I have nothing further.
Mr. DeAngelo, do you have any questions at all?
I do, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
I think I have to shift over, Your Honor. I apologize. Mr. Jones, good afternoon. I want to ask you a few questions. With regards to these cells, how often does the composition or the stability change in the cells, specifically a sludge cell? Do you know?
Throughout the life of the cell, depending on if there was a pocket of water or a pocket of snow, it may change as well, for instance, the time of season, but that was more superficial, or the top of the sludge, that characteristic would change because it would freeze, essentially.
So if cells in, say, the springtime, like around March and April, they would be a little bit more solid because they're coming off of a winter and they're somewhat thawing?
Well, if they weren't thawed out, that would be correct, but typically in April, you have a lot of spring rains, and they would go sloppier, be more unstable.
Okay. And well, let me ask you this question. You knew James Prokopovitz as Curly. How long was Curly working as a front loader at Georgia Pacific? Do you know what years he was working there at Georgia Pacific as a front loader?
There was quite a few, but I could not put a time frame.
Was he working there as a front loader prior to 2013?
Yes.
Do you know the last time that he was working out at the landfill with the cells?
No.
Okay. And would he have needed to have access to have a key to the cell when he was working at the Georgia Pacific Broadway site?
No.
Okay. And to the best of your knowledge, do you know how many keys McKeefrey's actually had for the landfill?
They were issued one at the beginning of the contract.
And typically the person who has that key would be the, I guess, the operator at the landfill?
Yes.
With regards to, do you know if there was any other keys issued besides the one?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. With regards to the landfill itself, is it well lit in the sense of that? Is there lighting to guide these guys out, or is it pretty much the reason why they work during the daylight is because it's not lit up?
That is correct. There's very limited lighting, and obviously you have a safety matter, and that is the reason why we would not operate, during nighttime hours.
And so if it's dark, would you know if you were driving towards a cell or not, being out at that landfill?
You would need to have your lights on.
Okay. But even if you had your lights on, would you know if you were coming up to a cell?
It would depend on the darkness of the night.
Sure.
If it was a moonlit night, you would see the outlines.
Okay. You mentioned that there were some safety precautions or dikes around the cells. What exactly are those?
External dikes are constructed of sand and various other engineering components. And internal dikes may be constructed of sand, boiler ash, and engineering components.
And so if somebody hasn't been out to the landfill in a while, would they know which cells were in operation?
Yes, because in the active cells, which is typically 2 cells, you would see recent deposits that would be bladed out.
Okay. And you think that there was only 2 cells active in 2013?
Technically, there have been 3, but normally we only use 2
Okay.
for the
So,
disposal of sludge.
all right, so the 3 cells that were active was 1 for sludge?
Usually, in reference to that, there would be 3 sludge cells. There also would have been for storage, 2 to 3 ash cells.
Okay. So when you say that there was active cells, are we only talking about active sludge cells, or would the ash also be considered an active cell?
We'd be utilizing it since our boiler ashes, we're getting into a technical term. They're beneficially reused, so they're not classified as waste. So when I refer to 3 active cells, that's waste cells.
Okay, so they're only the waste aspects of what was being brought out from Georgia Pacific was put in cells. Like if there was active ash that you could use to put on roads or cap things or something that was more useful, you would put it off to the side?
We would store it in a cell,
You would,
but it's a different classification because it's beneficial reuse.
okay. So the 3 active ones would have only been for dumping in paper waste sludge?
Correct.
Okay. And when you say the consistency, I think the state used consistency of like oatmeal or quicksand, is it only pockets that's that way, or is it the entire cells that way?
Throughout an active cell, it would vary. That would be the range of the characteristics inside the cell.
So if you're just on the edge, it could be more solid than maybe a pocket in the middle, or vice versa.
Yes.
Okay. And if you're not going out there on a regular, you wouldn't know what the stability of that cell would be on any given day, correct?
That would be correct. Yeah, specifically, you wouldn't know it.
Okay. And as far as searching them, do you know if any of the 3 cells that were active in 2013, were they close to being capped?
I have to apologize. I don't remember what 3 cells were active at that time.
Understood. It's been a long time, so you wouldn't know which numbers the cells were there and when they got capped at that point, correct?
We would have to look in the records.
Okay. I don't have any further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lemko, do you have any redirect?
But based upon your training and experience out at those cells, there would have been several cells available and from what you recall, 3 active sludge cells. Is that right?
Correct.
When you're referring to the 2 to 3 ash cells, are those still also available for things to be placed into them?
Ash, if the facility is generating that ash.
And through the years, isn't it true that sometimes there have been times when, although you like to keep a cell sludge or a cell ash, there has been co-mixing that's been done?
Co-mixing is done to provide a stable working surface typically.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. DeAngelo, do you have any other questions?
A little bit of follow-up. Mr. Jones, when you say that there's co-mixing of ash, does that create a more solid surface for like trucks or the Bobcat to move the stuff into the middle of the cell?
Yes.
And the Bobcat that's working out there, is it a pretty heavy duty piece of equipment?
It's a dozer, and yes, it is, but based on its design, it has wide pads, so the surface pressure it applies is what we refer to as low ground pressure.
So this dozer, even though I'm assuming it's several thousand tons, because of the way it's designed, it can go over the cell and not necessarily sink?
That's its design, yes.
Okay. So you can, in theory, drive on it if the cell's stable enough?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and you are excused then. Mr. Saunders, do you know how to get this off Zoom then?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you ready for your next witness?
If I could have a minute, Your Honor.
Yes.
Will you please remain standing and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Will you please state your full name for the record and spell both your first and last name for the court?
Timothy Thomas, Timothy Thomas.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Thomas, are you recently retired?
Correct.
Previous to your retirement, where did you work?
The Brown County Sheriff's Office.
How long did you work with the Brown County Sheriff's Department?
A little over 30 years.
With regard to your role working in the, at the Sheriff's Department, what was your position?
I had several positions. My last position was in the courthouse. Before that, it was the investigative division.
Were you a law enforcement officer?
Yes.
And so you were, as a police officer, did you have training and experience with respect to investigating criminal instances of conduct?
Yes, I did.
Did you help collectively with other investigators at the Brown County Sheriff's Department in investigations, including homicide investigations?
Yes, I did.
At some point, did you work with Sergeant Roman Ehrenstein at his request to check in to contacting hospitals about the possibility that Victoria Prokopovitz was there?
Correct.
And what did you do with respect to checking that?
I was made aware through the investigation that she had been on the 25th of April of 2013 at Bellin Psychiatric Hospital.
And with respect to contacting hospitals after that, were you checking to make sure that she was not a patient anywhere after she went missing?
Correct.
And do you remember which hospitals you checked?
The hospitals in Brown County, the local hospitals.
Okay. And so which hospitals would that include?
St. Vincent, St. Mary's, Bellin, and Aurora.
And as a result of making contact with those hospitals, and again, she was reported missing April 26, 2013. You were checking those hospitals to see if she had been seen at any of them after that?
Correct.
And what were your findings with respect to each of those hospitals?
I was told that she wasn't there.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. D'Angelo. Do you have any questions? Pardon?
No questions, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. If you'd call your next witness in, please?
Can we approach her?
Yes. Why don't you put that on mute again? Gentlemen of the jury, we're going to be getting done a little bit early today at about 4:15-ish. So just to let you know, and then we'll start up again at 8:30 tomorrow.
At this time, Your Honor, the state would call Sergeant Roman Aronson to the stand.
Will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. You may be seated. Will you please state your name for the record and spell your first and last name for the court?
Absolutely. My first name is Roman. My last name is Aronstein. R-O-M-A-N. Last name A-R-O-N-S-T-E-I-N.
Sergeant Aronson, how are you employed?
I'm currently employed as an officer with the Brown County Sheriff's Office.
And how long have you been employed with the Brown County Sheriff's Department?
I've been employed with the Brown County Sheriff's Office since 2001.
So approximately 19 years?
Yes, ma'am.
Previous to that, were you employed with any other law enforcement agency?
I was. I served in the United States Army. My military specialty was a police officer in the military. I also had a period of time where I was assigned to a counterintelligence unit and received some training in regards to that. As far as on the civilian side, I briefly worked for a couple of municipalities in the state of Wisconsin, the first one being the West Salem Police Department, and the second one being the Wapaka Police Department prior to coming to the Brown County Sheriff's Office.
With respect to your role now as an investigator at the Brown County Sheriff's Department, do you work in the investigative division?
I currently do. I have been in that particular position since 2013.
And what does an investigator at the Brown County Sheriff's Department, what are your assigned duties?
Sure. So we have a number of investigators that have specialties. I have had specialties in previous assignments as part of the investigative division, but my current assignment is general investigations. So what that means is anywhere from misdemeanor crimes such as thefts, all the way to complicated and extensive fraud investigations, as well as crimes against persons such as sexual assaults, robberies, homicide.
With respect to your role as an investigator at the Brown County Sheriff's Department, you've outlined various types of crimes you investigate. Do you have training and experience with respect to taking interviews from alleged suspects, victims, and witnesses?
Absolutely.
Do you also have training and experience with respect to taking items of evidence into custody?
Absolutely.
With respect to your role as an investigator in that division, is it common for all of the different investigators to work collectively when investigating an incident?
It's not only common, it's encouraged. It's a process, it's a team approach process, especially in complicated and prolonged investigations.
Besides being an investigator, we've heard now a little bit about some of the different units that law enforcement agencies have. At some point, have you been part of the dive unit through the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what was your position there?
I was a dive member.
So are you certified?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay, and what did that certification entail?
I have a number of certifications. I have an open water diver certifications and I think it was an advanced diver certification, ice diver certification, public safety diver certification or training. Once you're a member of the dive unit, there are a lot of fields and a lot of different specialties that you can explore and continue your training in. So those are some of the things that I've done.
Besides being affiliated with the dive unit, do you also have certification with respect to being a crisis investigator or a negotiator?
Yes, ma'am. I am one of the crisis negotiators for the Brown County Sheriff's Office. It's once again, it's a very much so a team approach. A lot of times we see on the news where you have a hostage negotiator or something like that, and it appears to be a one-man sport, but it's not. It's a team aspect, and the success or failure in a crisis type of a situation is really a team approach. And so I am a team member as part of that, and we work very closely with our SWAT team during their deployments.
With regard to these various roles that you've held at your agency, have you also had an assignment to the Brown County Drug Task Force?
Yes, ma'am. So I was also an undercover or plainclothes narcotics officer or investigator from 2008 to 2013. That is also an investigative type of a position. During that particular assignment, I had an opportunity to investigate simple type of narcotics investigations, as well as very complex conspiracies and criminal drug trafficking organizations. Those particular investigations required a lot of use of different investigative tactics, whether there were recordings, monitorings, those kind of things.
Now, with respect to your position at the Brown County Sheriff's Department, at some point, did you have cause to become involved in an investigation involving a missing person by the name of Victoria Prokopovitz?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And how did that happen?
So on April 26, 2013, sometime just before 6 p.m., I was assigned to assist an investigative colleague of mine to respond to 5118 Coonish Drive, located in the township of Pittsfield, Brown County, Wisconsin, to meet with what was identified as the complainant in this matter of a missing adult woman that's been identified as somebody that was vulnerable. And I was notified that first responders and numerous law enforcement had already been on scene for hours. conducting searches, as well as speaking with the complainant. So I assisted my colleague in responding to that residence.
With all these years of experience, and you've outlined the fact you have training and experience with respect to taking statements from an individual, is the manner in which somebody discloses something to law enforcement important in your line of work?
Absolutely.
Do you look at a lot of different factors, including surrounding circumstances and their interactions with others, in determining what's going on in an incident?
Absolutely. In my 20-plus years as a law enforcement officer and a professional crisis negotiator, I have had an opportunity to interview, speak, work with, associate with a number of different individuals, and frequently those individuals are under high level of stress, trauma, and so I have had a lot of experience in when it comes to communicating with folks under those type of circumstances, yes.
As a law enforcement officer, is it significant when you are interacting with individuals if you learn that they have lied about something in an investigation?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is that something that can be deemed a consideration for somebody being involved in a criminal offense that you're investigating?
I think it depends on the nature of the lie, the significance of the lie, the sophistication of the lie, the amount of how protracted or how long that lie is maintained, and really the context in the overall investigation. Unfortunately, in the field of law enforcement, being lied to or being told something that's less than truthful is not uncommon, and that in of it by itself is not sufficient enough to be able to determine much besides that it's a lie. You have to do a lot more work.
Now, with respect to the lie, though, you indicated duration of the lie is important.
Yes, absolutely. The veracity, duration, the steps, and things that an individual takes in order to further that lie is also something that I take into consideration.
Now, you indicated at some point you become involved in an investigation into the whereabouts of Victoria Prokopovitz. At the beginning of your contact, you've indicated you're proceeding out to the Kunish Road address. This is a missing person investigation, is that right?
That's what's being relayed to me as I'm being requested to respond to that location.
Okay, who requested you on that date? Do you remember?
I do. It was my supervisor at that time. It was Lieutenant Light.
Okay. So you're asked to respond, and you indicated, did you respond there?
I did. I did some brief checks. I checked with Sergeant Thomas. I briefly made a request for availability of a helicopter based on the information I was receiving, and then I accompanied my partner, Sergeant Shartner, to that location on Kunish Road.
And at some point when you arrived at the address, who did you meet with?
So Sergeant Shartner and I met with Mr. James Prokopovitch that evening.
Okay. And do you see the individual that you're just referred to as Mr. Prokopovitz here in the courtroom today?
I do, ma'am.
Could you just briefly point out to where he's seated, what he's wearing?
I can. Mr. Prokopovitch is seated at the defense counsel table. He's wearing a blue shirt. He's wearing, between the two individuals, between a female and a male.
Let the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant, James Prokopovitz.
Mr. DeAngelo, do you agree?
Yes, Your Honor, no objection.
Then the record will reflect that. Thank you. And Ms. Landfill, I think this is a good time to lead off, to break off. So ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I do have to read one more admonition to you. Jurors, I'll caution you not to discuss this case with anyone, not even among yourselves, until this case is submitted to you for your final deliberations in the jury room, and you are then to discuss it only among yourselves in the jury room. And with that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you'd go with Bailiff Tom, and we'll see everybody at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you. A little bit earlier in the jury. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.